I'm Mayla Boguslav, and I research researchers. As a researcher, I get this incredible opportunity to advance science and knowledge, and I do not take that lightly. Taxpayers like you fund research, so we owe it to you and ourselves to ensure you can access and understand our new knowledge and findings. Welcome to the Ignorance Podcast, where we learn about current questions in research. I live by the motto, ignorance is bliss, because when you don't know something, it's an opportunity to learn. Let's welcome our guest researcher for today. Please introduce yourself by name only and your favorite thing to do outside of work.
Hey, Mayla. Thanks for having me here. I'm Lauren Chenarides, and outside of work, lately I like to do nothing because I'm so busy, but at least one day of the week, I really like to just relax, spend time with my partner and our dog. We like to go outside, try to be out in nature, just finding small ways to make our day, make my day feel more spacious.
I totally agree with you on that. Spending time with my partner and my dog is the best. What does making space help you in terms of your work or just life in general?
Yeah. I get a lot of ideas when I'm not doing anything else. Or when I'm even, I guess I still am doing something, but, the other day I got a really cool idea just when I was swimming laps at the pool. So, just like doing something where like going on a run, I got a really good idea for something else. And I was just outside and I don't even think I was listening to music or anything, it's just sort of that meditative state.
So what questions excite you in your work? What questions are you currently pursuing?
This was tricky to think about because I do a lot of different types my research is very diverse. But I was thinking about what is the core question that excites me, and really it's about how people and organizations make decisions inside complex systems. So a lot of my work focuses on understanding food markets. But the common thread in a lot of the research that I do is decision making. And so identifying who is the decision maker. And I use a lot of data to operationalize and to think about how decisions are made. So when I think of the concept of a decision, I'm looking at certainly the underlying framework, kind of the conceptual framework that I can model. But then I'm also looking at really high dimensional or very detailed data sets to characterize decisions that different entities make. So, for example, studying food markets, I'm interested in food retailers as decision makers. So how do they decide how to price food? How do they decide when to change prices? Will they change prices? When? Under what conditions? Especially, in the food retail space, which is my main focus area, customers are really important to the food retailer's ability to survive. So we want customers to keep coming back. So how do food retailers operate in a highly regulated environment, which is heavily regulated by USDA, FDA. This is U.S. Department of Agriculture and the Food and Drug Administration. So how do they operate under these conditions and ensure that their customers keep coming back to them? So on the other hand, too, you have to think about the customers. So food retailers are making a decision. Well, the customers are going to respond to that, and they have to make a decision. Are they going to come back? If something changes in their food environment, if a new product is introduced, if a price changes, if there's a new health policy, if there's a new bit of information, all these things we call treatments. Or they're examples of treatments for the customers from the customer's perspective, and understanding, okay, well, what is new information or something that's changed in their environment that the customer now has to make a decision, perhaps in a new way. And then kind of related to all of this, because I'm using data, really high level data, granular data sets to answer these types of questions, I'm interested in the systems that are built, the data systems that are built that allow researchers like myself to study those decisions more clearly and to build models that are able to, answer these very complex decision-making processes.
Yeah. What an important question that I think most of us don't think about on a day-to-day basis. But like so important to think about, like we all spend so much money on food and so much time on food. When you say like the food retailers, does that both include supermarkets and restaurants, kind of anyone that really touches food in some way?
Right. So I think of, so food outlets would be any place where a customer can acquire food. And there are also, so you could think of your supermarket, you could think of, the mass merchandisers, the Walmarts of the world. There are, even other storefront businesses that have now been selling a greater share of the volume of products that they sell is our food items. An area of work that I've done a bit of research on are dollar stores. You might not think that dollar stores sell food, but in fact, over the last 10 to 20 years, they've been really growing that specific category of products that they sell. So food retailers can be, a majority of food retailers themselves are places where a shopper would go, purchase food, and then bring it home and prepare it at home. And then you've got the restaurants and the quick service places. Those are your food away from home retailers. Then those food outlets is, you're going to go there, you'll buy whatever, dish that you'll buy, and then you'll eat it on site, on premises. So those are the two majority of, we think about how people allocate their food dollars between the food away from home and the food at home. Majority of my decision making focuses on food at home, and then there's a whole other world of food away from home research too.
Can you get a little bit more specific about the data? Like what data would you want to track to understand, both sides to think about decisions? Like I can think about the price, right? It's like, when I go to the store, I was just thinking about this the other day, that when I was a kid, pasta was like under $1 and now it's over $2. And so it's like not just doubled, but like, even more than that. And it's just crazy. And like I live in LA, so it's not cheap to live here in those regards. But, we also have really good produce, and that's actually sometimes cheaper than a lot of things because that's grown more locally. Mm-hmm. And so it's a really interesting question of like, how do you make these decisions of how to price different things? And, I don't know. I don't think about like, is the supermarket losing money? Because it feels such a staple of what we really need. So if you can speak a little bit more to those two questions, I'd appreciate it.
So on the data, so think about, how would I, as a researcher, identify things such as price changes? So I use a lot of the data that I use is data that retailers use themselves. It's called transactions level data. So what that is, a shopper goes to the checkout aisle and they scan all their items. All those items in that purchase, you might see it on a receipt as a shopper. The retailers get that in an Excel, basically some very big Excel file. So what that includes is what the item is, how much it cost in the store that day, whether it was bought on promotion. There might be some discount applied to it. So there'll be information about maybe what was in stock that day, how many units. And this is just for one shopper. This is for one transaction. And so throughout the day, throughout the week, throughout the month, throughout the year, all of this information is being collected across many retailers, across many states, across the country. The data sets that I use, it's called a sample of households. There's not every single shopper, but there's a sample of shoppers that represent broader purchasing patterns across the United States. So when researcher like myself has access to this transactions level data, we're able to see across the year the same set of households, looking at what they've bought, and some of the, like I mentioned earlier, is that there might be something that changes to that shopper's environment, such as maybe a new policy was introduced, or maybe there was a price promotion or some kind of specific sale that the retailer was promoting that particular week. And we can look at what happened to shoppers' purchasing behavior around those incidences. So I'll give you an example of a study that a grad student that I'm working with is doing, and she's looking at a health policy. And the specific health policy is focused on diabetic households. So these diabetic households, one way to manage disease is through medications. So medication could be insulin, but with rising insulin prices, new policies have been introduced to help offset the cost of the insulin drugs itself. And a lot of these decisions, we think like, oh, okay, the federal government's going to take care of it. But in fact, some of those decisions are made at the state level, the policy level decisions, in terms of what the states are requiring for the insurers to do on behalf of these patients. So what we have is a smattering, a patchwork, if you will, of different states having different policies all around how much insulin will be subsidized. So how much to offset the cost of those rising insulin prices. And so what she's looking at is how the variation across the United States in terms of these differences in health policies impact the decisions of shoppers within the states who have diabetes, who rely on insulin. Because here's the idea: if insulin becomes cheaper, if the policy helps individuals who have diabetes, increase their discretionary income, then maybe they'll substitute to more, what we would call like higher quality items. So instead of buying ground beef, maybe they'll substitute like flat iron steak, or maybe they'll substitute from, having romaine lettuce to spinach. So we're looking at, so she's been really investigating how do the actual food purchases of what shoppers are buying within their basket change if a household lives in a state where the drug becomes cheaper. Now, here's the other interesting thing is that, that's one hypothesis. The other hypothesis is, well, what if a drug becomes cheaper? Well, then could it be that instead of households managing their diet through, say, an alternative method like lifestyle, increasing their physical activity, maybe even just electively choosing a healthier diet, could it be that these households are going to substitute to just managing their diet through relying more heavily on their medication? So there's these two differing paths that she's considering, and all of this is made possible by having access to this scanner data where we can identify who these shoppers are, what they're buying, not only the item that they're buying, but the quality of the item that they're buying, whether it's the lower priced item versus the higher priced item, and then also looking at the demographics of these households and some of the conditions that these households have through the access to more detailed information about the shoppers themselves, such as where they live, the state where they live, which is important because then we can identify where the policy, with the jurisdiction of the policy that they're in, and then also the fact that whether or not they have diabetes or not. So we could say, okay, this is truly something that household with diabetes would have versus a comparative household who doesn't. It's this very interesting experiment. It's a natural experiment where we can use the treatment of the health policy to look at the effect on household food choices.
Yeah, and their downstream health, ideally, too, right? Is it affecting their health in a positive way?
Right.
It's really, really fascinating to think about that, so many different things affect how we spend our money in different places. And because we need food, it's always something we have to do. But depending on our other needs or other situations, it can fluctuate because there are so many options of what you can do, whether they're healthy or not for us in different ways. Yeah, I have to ask, can anyone access this data? And is it anonymized? Because I don't know, like as a shopper, it's like, do I want my data there? What am I getting out of this would be kind of a question I have too.
Right. So for the most part, I will say none of this data is collected through the federal government. So for the most part, I would say your tax dollars are not going to fund this. This is all done through private organizations. Primarily, I access the data through my academic position at a discounted rate. So for example, if somebody who's affiliated with an institution wants to access scanner data, they can access it through the Kilt Center for Marketing at the University of Chicago's Booth School of Business. That's one of the ways to access that data. There's two other data proprietors who have provided basically an academic discount for some of the scanner data. And then there is an option to use some of the data through the U.S. Department of Agriculture's Economic Research Service. That's the caveat there, where a lot of the data access through the Economic Research Service, they have priorities of issues that are pertinent to the Farm Bill, or ancillary things that the USDA is interested in studying for a specific year or period of time. So food security is one of those topics that is really important to USDA. So thinking about where are households who rely on food assistance, where are they shopping, what are the prices that they're facing, how far do their benefits go in terms of how many are they targeted effectively? Are this places where households can shop and redeem their food assistance dollars located in their communities, or do they have to travel far away? So there's a lot of research that the USDA really likes to see.
Yeah, so I can start to kind of see like what's in it for me. So kind of a bigger question, how do you hope to impact the world? How have you impacted the world with these questions that you're thinking about?
I think at the end of the day, I want people to have access to information and resources that allow them to make informed decisions. I mean, you just mentioned yourself how, you're a shopper, you go to a store and there's just so many things available to you. Like as a shopper, a lot of people, they just focus on the 40 items that they buy in their basket over the course of the year, and they very rarely diverge from those 40 items. But what if those 40 items, maybe like 5 of them, 10 of them, some percentage of those items is not optimal for maybe their health? So, what sort of information might be necessary for those shoppers to be able to improve their food choices? And what policies exist so that there's the ability for individuals to purchase the optimal basket for them at the right price. And so that's why I think the food retail sector is so instrumental in impacting or affecting or influencing the ways in which individuals make choices. And so, for example, the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, which is our nation's food assistance purveyor, that operates out of allocated from the Farm Bill. This is a really important program for low-income individuals. And I don't know if many people know this, but a shopper or a household that is allocated food assistance dollars through SNAP can't shop everywhere. They can only shop at retailers that are SNAP authorized. And every so often, you may hear that there's changes in retailer eligibility requirements. So SNAP retailer eligibility changed pretty dramatically in 2016. And as of earlier in May of 2026, the administration announced that they were going to change the stocking requirements again, so that there would be more emphasis on what's considered quote unquote real food. The new changes are proposing 7 different varieties across certain perishable food groups and maybe some non-perishables as well, but 7 items per category across maybe 7 categories. So that's a minimum requirement to be eligible. And then there's a lot of other things that are yet to be codified, but I think that's so interesting because the supermarket, sure, they might be able to adhere to that, but what we might see is that some of the stores that are smaller, that don't necessarily have 7 varieties, may not be able to adhere to that without expanding space. When stores have to increase space, change their product assortment, have new relationships established with different contractors or suppliers, that's going to increase costs. And so how do those prices change? So certainly, you've got so many things happening here. on one hand, the food retailers that are going to be able to accept SNAP, that pool of retailers may start to shrink. And then the retailers that still want to adhere to those SNAP stocking requirement conditions because they get a lot of their revenue from SNAP sales, they're going to have to decide, am I going to continue to adhere to these stocking requirements? Or if I do, what will I have to change? How will my prices have to change? Will my prices go up? And what will that do to the households who, again, are relying on food assistance? But how are these policy decisions impacting the decisions not only that shoppers are going to have to make, but retailers themselves are going to have to make? So when you go back to the original question of how do I hope to impact the world, I really want people to have access to this information and to the resources that allow them to make informed decisions, so that, when somebody like myself is looking to study the unintended and intended consequences of such a policy change, can do so with credibility and with appropriate tools.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's like, I don't know that just the average shopper knows a lot of these things that are going on in the background. And it's even thinking about the SNAP piece. It's like, if you're used to getting your food at one specific place, to super change that actually is really difficult. Like, humans just don't want to change anyways. And it's kind of like, maybe you as the shopper don't care if it has this 7 varieties and it doesn't mean anything to you. And even if it then did have it, you wouldn't buy more things. Like, it wouldn't actually change how you would exist. But yet it's like these bigger policies that are now having impact on us. And so I guess I'm curious, why this question? Who has influenced you, and who are people you look up to that have studied this? And like, why are you so interested in these ideas?
So why this question really goes back. I was living in New York City. This was before I went to grad school. I dabbled in consulting, and I really tried to find activities or things outside of work where I could give back to my community. And I volunteered at a local food cooperative. And a food cooperative, talk about food retailers. Food co-op is a, and there are a lot of cooperatives, it's not just food, but it's something that's owned and operated by its members. How I served as a member was every week I would do a shift at the store. And this was it's a 4th Street food co-op in New York City, tiny little place, mostly bulk food and little produce section where it was, local food from different farms from Long Island, and maybe like tempeh and tofu and really crunchy granola stuff. And what I noticed is that when I was getting trained, they specifically had the volunteers or members, I suppose, learn how to use this specific type of payment called EBT, which is electronic benefits transfer. This is a type of debit card that food assistance users will have access to, and that's the card that gets refilled every month. And so there was a specific process that the food co-op had to do when someone with food assistance dollars was shopping there. And I had no idea what this was. I am very, I grew up with very comfortably, and never realized how many people in my community relied on these resources. So that was really what planted the seed. I really got curious about that, and I was really active in the local food systems culture community in New York City at the time. So that was the kind of the start of me realizing that I wanted to do something in food access. So really, my community was the main influence on my trajectory. So when I look at how I want my research trajectory to go, I really do want to make an impact, like I said, to give people the access to information and resources, but I want to channel it and direct it toward my local community, because it's a part that shaped me, and it's something I want to give back to as well.
Yeah, I love that. Food is just such a huge part of our lives, and it's so cool that you got this opportunity to really understand that on a deeper level than I think most people really do. And just having some stake in it, right? Being a member in the co-op just makes a huge difference to how you understand the world at large. And I'm sure also, for the people on Snap, maybe it's not necessarily fun that there's a different process too. And it kind of calls people out. So to be able to understand that and be sensitive to that and really help people in that way is just really, really, really powerful. And so I'm curious, how do you know if you've been successful at your work? And as a researcher, what is your evaluation criteria?
There's this local organization that I just started working with called Vindicate Food Rescue, and it's incredible. They are a food rescue, so they travel to different places across northern Colorado and collect food from retailers that would get thrown out, from restaurants that would get thrown out, from farms that would get, I mean, there's all over, like, many, many places. And they have a marketplace inside their distribution, their aggregation center. And folks that are shopping there, many of them are in fact food insecure, or may rely on food assistance. But what's great about this system is it's completely free. Shoppers can go there, or customers can go there, get as much food as they want. It's run primarily by 3 paid staff, but 220 volunteers. I mean, the organization is so impactful that they're bringing that many volunteers to help support and run this organization. And one of the volunteer positions when the market's open is the front of house greeter. And it's really important to make everyone feel important and make everyone feel that their being there matters, that their being there, they're saving food from going in the landfill. It doesn't matter that, some people roll up in a Porsche, some people roll up in their bike. So no one's asking about your background or anything. It's just sort of, just come as you are, take as much as you can, save it from the landfill. And I'm so excited to be able to be a part of this organization in my very small way, because it gets at just like the humanity of it. So maybe in some way, like, that is an answer to this feeling of feeling successful. It's just sort of, this feeling of wow, I feel enthusiastic about what I'm doing, and I feel like I'm making a difference. I think a lot of what I'm realizing and how I feel successful is when I've been able to, from a research standpoint, I guess, like, clearly communicate something to another person, and I can see that a light bulb has gone off. I mean, I feel like that's really evident in teaching. I feel so successful when I have a student say, I really got this. I really understood what you were saying when you gave this example, or thank you so much for introducing me to so and so. I got an internship with this company, or like, I had so much fun in that class. The way you presented it really helped me understand something I wasn't able to get yet.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Like, the light bulb idea is really great. The logo for my podcast is like a question mark with a light bulb, because I think when we can get to the right question, the light bulb goes off of how we then solve it.
I think it's so great to focus on the question. I was just at a talk the other day, and it was a talk on the scholarship of teaching and learning. The speaker was talking about how he designs his syllabi, and instead of saying the things that are going to be covered in the class, I'm going to cover topic A, B, and C, he says, here are the things we're going to uncover, and these are the questions we're going to answer. Love that. It shifts the way I feel about the class, even as an instructor. And then I think your second point too about the questions, what is the right question and how do you answer it? This is my research community. We have a working group, and this summer we are asking that. What is the core question that we're trying to answer? So much so that we don't actually really know. So we're going to hold a workshop, and we're going to, because if you think about food security as maybe something that brings us all together, food security, maybe like very niche in food retail, and food retail serves a very small part of that in the food access space. But then you think about food security internationally, food production, it could even be more in the, soil quality. So there's so many things across agriculture that touch on food security.
Yeah. Number one, like I love the syllabus, like that idea of the questions. And a lot of times that's how I think about objectives when I give workshops, other stuff is like, I actually like objectives that are more questions than the statements, because I think it's more provocative and provoking. And it's really like, okay, do you feel like you actually got an answer to this question? And the answer that you've gotten and that I've gotten in the same workshop may be a little bit different because we all focus on different things versus like, this is what you were supposed to get out of it. I think I like the question idea because it just gives more space. As researchers, most of us could tell you our questions in 5 minutes. Like that's really what we're thinking about most of the time. And ideally, when we find answers, we pass it off to the right person to get it out into the world. That's really like kind of how research works. And then what excites us about those answers is the next questions we can ask, right? What can we now continue to learn? And that's sometimes why information shifts, right? Is because when we ask a new question or have new information, it changes how we think about something in new, fun ways instead of just facts changing. So I'd love to hear what has been your most surprising result in all of this work.
I think a lot of my work is, hey, I see something and maybe it's a news article, and then I see a similar news article and I'm like, this doesn't seem right. Where's the evidence here? Why are they coming up with these things? And so I think that's what started me down the working on dollar stores, is that dollar stores were expanding rapidly across the United States. And so much of the media, I even started to collect how many articles I had seen, but it got too many. I couldn't keep up of just how many were saying that dollar stores are invasive species across the United States. So I started thinking about, okay, well, what are dollar stores? I didn't even know that they were that much of a threat to food retailers, So that led me down a multi-paper, multi-year project looking at the competitive effects of dollar stores on food retail, and several findings. One, that they're a major contributor to providing food access to households in low-income neighborhoods. Then looked at some things around, dollar stores, how they compete, who they compete with. Are they what we call cannibalizing sales from other formats? Because one of the media headlines is that they're driving businesses out. When they enter a community, they're driving businesses out. And I think that's a much more complicated question to answer, because you have to think about what the local economics are. So is that neighborhood, what are other things that are supporting industry in that neighborhood? Maybe it's not just, and not just to blame a new store coming in, but maybe that new store coming in is a symptom of something else, something underlying that. And there was, there was some evidence that when dollar stores come in, yes, maybe no new stores are going to enter for some time, but in fact, some of the findings that were more supportive of this multi-store, multi-option, food retail environment is that dollar stores and supermarkets are complementary. So some other research coming out of Tufts found that shoppers shopping at a dollar store could buy that same item for a little bit cheaper, and then that opened up their discretionary income to spend on higher quality products at the supermarket. So it was almost like an economizing relationship between the discount store, the dollar store, and the supermarket. So that was something that was interesting, and helped to provide some depth and context. We also found that dollar stores, in the sense of who are they closely competing with, those are the smaller footprint stores, and we did find that they were that the market share would change after dollar stores remained in that community after some time. So ultimately, that cannibalization story was for those smaller formats, superettes, where they don't sell many items, because they're seen as substitutes with the dollar store. So those superettes and those dollar stores. So we had published a paper on that. And then additional work on SNAP retailer eligibility changes and looking at the assortment of stores or the different types of formats that were able to endure some of those stocking requirement changes, that dollar stores were able to maintain eligibility through those changes. And if those stocking requirement changes are any sort of proxy or any sort of representation of the healthfulness of a store or how helpful it needs to be, one can shop at a dollar store and procure a quote unquote healthy basket, at least according to the eligibility requirements. Again, this was for a change in 2016. And now with these new changes, I'm interested in looking at how this change will impact that.
Yeah. It's always really interesting when a market that you didn't know existed comes on your radar, and you're just kind of like surprised by the fact that they exist and that people really use them, and you just didn't even know. I guess I'm also curious, who wants to know about this information? Imagine government wants to know, like, how are all these programs affecting things? Or maybe they do. And then also, like, maybe the retailers also want to know to understand how they should be changing things. What kind of trickles down to the customer in terms of like information?
Some of the work that I'm doing on this is more indirect. I think the core of the research is to generate insights that'll then translate into policy, some sort of a translational policy piece. So writing a paper, an academic paper, but then extrapolating from that, what are the insights, and then turning that into a report that then gets read by a policymaker. That's sort of like and then through that, like all that accumulation of information, the policies themselves will then impact the consumer, the shopper. But I think the important thing here is that why policy? Like, why? Like, can't really touch it. It's sort of a word that a lot of people really understand. You talk about you vote for politicians, but politics isn't the same as policy. And so why policy? I think because if in a perfect world, markets provide a place where buyers and suppliers interact and agree to pay a certain price or sell an item at a certain price, and we say, like, market's clear, everyone's happy, everyone gets what they want, there's no inefficiencies, there's no surplus food, everything gets exchanged in this very clean way. But food markets don't operate like that, and they're like probably one of the clearest examples of like, we can't predict how much is going to get produced. So many things impact our own supply of food. We have to supply more than we actually need, which is why we have waste, because not enough, there's more than we actually can buy. There are items that people aren't willing to pay that price. So then what happens there? Maybe there's more waste there. So there's a lot of inefficiencies in the food system. And that's why policy comes in and helps to address some of the inefficiencies that have become apparent, such as food waste, or the rising insulin prices, or places where supermarkets are not profitable. That's an equilibrium. That's just like, a store is not going to open in a place where there's not enough customers. So, but what type of store? Maybe it's just a supermarket. Maybe other stores would thrive there because they're able to get enough customers coming from farther away. So there's so many things about food markets where policy has to come in and sort of like correct those, are they market failures or inefficiencies, we'll just say.
Mm. Yeah, and I can imagine there's a lot of disagreements on all of those policies. Yeah, so if you could do anything, not limited by grants or other factors in your space, what would you be doing? What is your vision for the world?
I really love building stuff. Like, I really love to think about ideas and then build the thing. I think of myself as like a little bit of a spider. I like to weave concepts together and sort of like think about who needs to be here, what things do we need for this, and and then start to build. Maybe I'm more of the architect. Maybe I'm not actually the one with the hammer, but in that sense, I really want to build stronger data infrastructure for food and agriculture. So I really want to build the data infrastructure that researchers and teams need in the food and agriculture space, so that these complex questions can be asked and answered with evidence. So researchers such as myself, we're working with many puzzle pieces. They have data on prices and purchases, but there's another data set on store locations. There's another one on policies. Maybe there's another data set on health outcomes, where different firm level information on who's investing in those companies, lots of different components of a very complex food system. And they're separated. And so, they're held by different organizations under different agreements. Who can access it? Where? When? Do they need a specific computer to access it? It's a really complicated thing. And I really want to create a system, a network, and an entity, an organization to solve this puzzle. Building a system where data can be connected more easily, and then also emphasizing that if data sets that certain researchers are using are not necessarily adequate anymore, or maybe they need to be looked at in a new way, we can develop and design that data set so that it doesn't, we're not necessarily shutting down data or removing data sets without replacing it with something that's trustworthy. And so thinking about data and trust and completeness, like surveys, a lot of the surveys that are asked every year, that have been asked for years and years, their completion rates are declining. But instead of saying, okay, because completion rates are declining, we're going to remove the data, let's start building something that can serve as a replacement before actually taking that away. Because once you take, if there's a panel data set and you take away and you stop collecting a data set in 1 year, you break that panel, and then you can't ask continuous question on certain topics. So we saw that happen recently with the the current population survey, food security supplement. They're going to collect it 1 more year, and they're basically going to defund this. And it's really unfortunate because it's probably the most used. I believe actually it is the most used module in one of the surveys to measure food security in America. It's used in many reports, and it's a tragedy. So yes, there were declining rates in terms of who was responding to these to the survey, but again, I don't think you can take something away without having a plan to replace it, and at least communicating that to the research community. So this is something I feel really passionately about, building better data systems, and then making sure that the researchers have those modern technology and modern resources to continue to answer complex and increasingly complex questions.
Yeah, I love that vision. Something I think a lot about when it comes to evaluations is, no one really wants to fill out a survey because it's really unclear what the win is for me. It's really a static point that tends to never come back to me what the results are and anything like that. And so I think a lot about is like, what's the win in the evaluation that I'm doing, and what is somebody getting from doing it? And so I think a lot about, what are questions I can ask that just them answering themselves will be insightful to them, not just to me as somebody who wants the data. So, so I find surveys really complicated from that perspective. We still use them a lot because it's, it's helpful. But, the rates are like 30% is high, which is really sad because that's not actually a lot of people and probably really not representative of what's going on. And then we all know, the people who tend to fill these out are ones that have strong opinions. And so you're kind of missing that middle ground. And so, yeah, I kind of challenge the evaluation world to really think about like, what is in it for me as somebody that's filling this out in some way. I hope this vision comes to fruition, and thank you for all the work that you're doing for it. So yeah, last question before I have you introduce yourself. What has changed in your life because of your research? What do you pay attention to more because of it?
I would compare maybe my 21-year-old self to today. And I mean, I think I've always been curious about food systems, going back to when I was volunteering at the food co-op, and even before that. So I don't think my necessarily like day-to-day decisions have changed dramatically, but I think what's changed is the way I ask questions. Actually, it's sort of interesting. We're focusing a lot on questions here, because I'm asking. I find myself asking a lot more. Is like, what am I not seeing? And it's sometimes paralyzing because then I don't finish something. But it helps in a lot of ways too. And I think this is true in my work on food access. Conversations about policy. Like if I see a price, I'm not so quick to judge necessarily. I'm more curious. Like, why do I see this? What are the costs? Why did it go up so much? Like why? What's happening? It makes me feel more globally connected. I think about how things work. Like, okay, so was there a contract that the company lost, or did a price go down a lot? Maybe they got a new deal on something. They negotiated a deal. What were the strategies behind that? So, if I look at, how, if I'm looking at answering a research question on a household specific level, and I see some change in a behavior, I'm wondering, well, why did they make that change? And what could be a variety of reasons why that happened or why it didn't happen. We talk about the null result a lot. We're like, why don't we see anything? There was a policy change that certainly had something happen, but nothing happened. But why could that be? What did I leave out? Did I forget something? And so that's sort of like how it's really practically impacted my research process. And really, to get super meta is really, research has taught me to let the process lead me more than I lead the process. I may begin with a question or an intuition, but then the data may complicate that story. So I just try to stay open to that.
Yeah, stay curious, to your point earlier. Yeah, two comments. One, with the food prices thing, when eggs went like skyrocket crazy, where it like used to be kind of like $2 to $3 and then went to like $8 or even $10 or even more dollars, it was really frustrating. It's like eggs are kind of a staple in my diet because I'm vegetarian. And so it's like eggs are a really good source of protein, but it was so expensive, right? It ate up so much of the budget because it like was 5 times the price, if not more. And so it was kind of like, what do you do? And at first I was really annoyed, but then hearing about the avian flu and just, all these birds that are sick and all these things, it's like, that also sucks, right? Like I don't want that to be happening too. And so when I saw the egg prices came down, it was like, okay, like birds are not getting sick anymore and dying. That's actually a good thing in the world. And I want to support that not happening and, this like overproduction of things. And so it was able to shift my understanding of the problem a little bit more, even if I was a little bit frustrated just in the beginning that I could not access the food that I'm used to. And it just gets at this question of like, I don't think a lot of us understand where our food comes from. And it's just really powerful that you're really thinking a little bit more deeply about all of that in general. And then I think my other point was to this idea of the question. I've heard that a lot of research is really question transformation, that you may start at a question from the beginning, but as you go through, you may learn that's actually not answerable or not relevant or not anything. And so what happens is our questions are just changing as we're learning new things. And if we can stay open to the process, stay open to what's going on, and ideally be as little biased as possible, or be honest about our biases, then we can really start to shift our questions in the directions that we're starting to move. And I just really love this idea of, this question transformation at large that you're talking about too. So with that, I'd love for you to introduce yourself. Please say your name, your job title, and your field, and anything else you'd like to share.
My name is Lauren Chenarides. I'm an assistant professor in the Department of Agricultural and Resource Economics at Colorado State University. My field is applied economics, and my research focuses on food markets, food retail, consumer food choices, and the data systems we need to support food policy research.
My biggest takeaway is that decisions are complicated. We need sustained and connected information or data to inform our decisions, but that data is often hard to come by. Lauren aims to help with this for food markets. What information do you need to make good, in quotes, decisions? This podcast is hosted by me, Mayla Boguslav, and produced and edited by Joshua Mendel. To learn more about this episode's guest and any cited or named people, take a look at the episode description. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Ignorance Podcast. Please follow the Ignorance Podcast wherever you get your podcasts to learn about science through research questions.